UFC Vegas 53. DraftKings has released the salary so we can take our first look. You can call me Kunith. Let's make some money this week. Last week, the UFC and DraftKings pulled the rug so hard on us with that Alexandr Romanov garbage that I almost broke my nose on the floor. And also, standing arm triangle in the main event. I know that some people thought it was cool, personally. But we're back with another week of UFC action, a much better card than the Garbigio that they gave us last week. So I'm excited to get into this with you. And if you haven't already, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's get into this first look. At the top of the slate, we have Andrei Fili. He is going to be fighting Joanderson Brito this week. Andrei Fili has been in the UFC for what feels like forever, and he's still only 31, so he's really settling into his fighting prime, and he has a great matchup on his hands this week against Brito. We saw Joanderson Brito in his UFC debut where he didn't look good. He was pretty low output on the feet. He gave up takedowns with little to no resistance, and overall he just looked a step behind Bill Algeo. And with all due respect to Bill Algeo, if he's losing to him, then he's going to lose to Andrei Fili. And what I like about Andrei Fili, at least from my perspective, somebody who's breaking him down, is that we know what we're going to get from him at this point. He's got a good gas tank. He can wrestle. He's long for the weight class at 5'11" with a 74-inch reach. He's also been in there with some of the best guys in the division like Max Holloway, Yair Rodriguez, Calvin Kattar, Sadiq Youssef, Bryce Mitchell. And outside of the knockout loss to Yair Rodriguez, all of those fights did go the distance. They're all great learning experiences for Andrei Fili, and this looks like a significant step down in competition for him. I don't think that he dominates Brito. I don't think he dominates him at all, but I do think that he wins rounds. I think that that veteran savvy, those fight IQ moments that need to click are going to click, and he's going to steal rounds from Brito, and he's going to win a decision. He probably wins 2 out of the 3. I can see Brito landing the more powerful shots and having some success in the clinch, but ultimately, I do expect us to see a 29-28 unanimous decision for Andrei Fili. Now, from a DraftKings perspective, it's hard to want to get here because this is likely going the distance. Andrei Fili isn't throwing hundreds of strikes each fight. He relies a lot on footwork, grappling, slowing the pace of the fight, getting it where he needs to be. Historically, he hasn't scored well. I mean, these are losses, but if you remove the losses, 77 points. He had 108 in a first round KO, which I think that might be his only first round KO. No, he has one more in the UFC. But outside of that, I mean, he's not scoring that well in a lot of his decision wins. You see 86 points here, 69 points here, and to pay up at 9,300 just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I don't think a lot of people will get here on DraftKings because most of you should be recognizing that anyway. But the pick for me for this fight is Andrei Fili by decision, and I'll give you the line for that later in the week. A lot of the things that we talked about last week, just from a straight betting perspective, did pan out. So if you're taking these bets, these small bets along the way, and not even parlaying them together, just whatever amount of money you're comfortable here, there, small straight bets maybe for every fight, you're going to put yourself in a good position by the end of the card. I can assure you of that. Next at 9,200, we have Tatsuro Taira. He's going to be making his UFC debut against Carlos Candelario this week. And Candelario is also going to be making his UFC debut. Tatsuro is 10-0 as a professional, 9-0 as an amateur in Japan, where he actually did fight some decent guys with experience, decent records, a lot of fights. So when you look at their resumes side by side, he has the much stronger resume than Candelario does. Tatsuro's got about an 80% finish rate as a professional, and if you watch him in his fights, it's pretty obvious as to why. He throws with a ton of power, surprising power for this 125-pound division, and he's aggressively looking for submissions as soon as the fight hits the ground. I worry a little bit about his striking defense, just because he throws with such confidence and such power that sometimes his hands are nowhere close to defending his head while he's throwing these strikes. And that kind of habit against better strikers is going to get him in trouble at some point, but I think we are safe this week against Carlos Candelario. I think Candelario is being fed to Tatsuro in this spot a little bit by the UFC PR machine. He's coming off a loss in his Contender Series fight against Victor Altamirano, who is 0-1 in the UFC and tends to be in very, very close competitive fights. And outside of that, Candelario hasn't fought the highest level of competition outside of the Contender Series fight against Altamirano. So you're looking at a situation where I think he's completely outgunned here. So I expect the 22-year-old to win inside the distance. He just looks like the better athlete, the more dangerous striker, and he's going to be a very marketable prospect for the UFC. So I think matchmaking will be friendly to him, kind of like Sean O'Malley a little bit earlier in his career, or Paddy Pimblett right now.
This is business!
So the pick for me for this fight is Tatsuro inside the distance, and I think at this price point is a much better option than paying up for Andre Fili. He's got a better matchup, more finishing upside. I'm excited to see what he can do, and I'm not worried that he's making his debut because same thing for the other guy. So give me Tatsuro this week. He's going to be a key piece in a lot of our lineups. Now we drop down 200 in salary. We've got Natan Levy. He's going to be fighting Mike Breeden this week. Natan Levy is a 2-1 favorite. He might even be a little bit more than that at this point, but I really don't see it. He went 6-0 in LFA as a professional, which is pretty impressive, but when he made his debut against Rafa Garcia, he looked awful. He looked as green as his record would suggest, as green as the Hulk, as green as Shrek, as green as a bag of spinach. He was taken down 7 times in that fight, controlled for over an entire round on the ground. This was especially poor from him, considering that he's supposed to be a good grappler. So if James Krause can draw up a good plan for Mike Breeden, which I'm hoping that he will, then I think Mike Breeden is able to beat this guy. On the feet, I think Breeden has a huge advantage in terms of power, output, and he has more knockout wins than Natan Levy has fights. And I think the public is going to be pretty low on Mike Breeden coming into this, considering his knockout loss to Alex Hernandez, but I guarantee that if Alex Hernandez and Natan Levy fought, it would be the same result. So give me the underdog here. I think Mike Breeden surprises him on the feet. I think he sparks him with something early and is able to get him out of there. The pick for me for this fight is money Mike Breeden inside the distance. Next we have Gina Mazany. She's fighting Shayna Young. Mazany is 8,900 this week. This has got to be the lowest level flyweight fight that the UFC can put together, and you're probably going to need the winner of it in your lineup. Mazany has not looked good in the UFC. I believe this is her second round in the UFC. She was cut before and then came back. She's 2-5 all time, with those 2 wins coming over a very green Wu Yanan, and most recently against Rachel Ostovich, who is not good. She is most recently losing fights over in bare knuckle fighting. The one thing that Gina Mazany does well is that she secures takedowns in the first round, but outside of that, it's pretty bad. She doesn't take a punch well. She doesn't have 3-round cardio, and honestly, she looks like one of these fighters who is comfortable losing. When a fighter has a record like this, I think that there's a part of them that thinks, all right, I'm going to try really hard in the beginning to get the finish, but if it doesn't come and I gas out, then I'm out of there. No thank you, no more. I'll take the L. Unfortunately, that's the kind of vibe that I get from Gina Mazany. On the other side, we have Shayna Young, who's 0-2 in the UFC, but she did draw Macy Chasson in her debut and then Stephanie Egger after that, and both of these women are very solid fighters in the division. And what I liked out of these fights, more so with the Chasson fight, is that she made her opponents work. She was stuffing some takedowns, not all of them. I do think that she got 10-8'd at some point in that fight, but she went the distance with her. She fought hard against Stephanie Egger for as long as that fight went. And I do think that if she's able to keep this on the feet, she's going to give Mazany trouble. I think that she just has more dog in her than Gina Mazany does. And I think that Mazany will quit long before Shayna Young. I just worry that Mazany is so much of a better fighter in that opening round that we won't be able to see the second. But I'm telling you now, if the second round starts, I don't see a path to victory for Gina Mazany. She'll probably be cooked to the bone at that point, and then her cardio and durability issues are going to show up once again. So the pick for me is actually Shayna Young inside the distance. She's probably where I end up going on DraftKings. I don't feel great about it. Obviously, I don't. But with ownership and upside being considered, you probably need one of these women in your lineup. So whoever wins this contest is going to show up on the optimal. And I think this is probably the smarter side to get to. It'll at least help you do more things with your lineup. Next at 8,800, we have Krzysztof Jotko. He's fighting GM3 Gerald Meerschaert this week. There ain't no way I'm playing Krzysztof Jotko at 8,800. This guy is a decision machine. He has little to no knockout power, and he's not a real threat on the ground. He beats guys with pretty limited skill sets like Misha Serkinov, Eric Anders, Marc-Andre Barriol. And these are guys that he's quicker than, so he can control the pace, stay out of harm's way, and he's very, very good at doing that. He's been fighting for a while, and he has a lot of fights on his record. But when he's coming up against that higher level of competition, like Brad Tavares, Uriah Hall, they both knocked him out. David Branch out-grappled him. He doesn't necessarily do well against better fighters or fighters who are really good at one thing. Now, on the other side, if we look at Gerald Meerschaert, I mean, this guy is a specialist, right? Like his last 3 fights, all by way of submission. These are all rear naked chokes as well. So he has momentum, and I think we see a 4th straight submission win for him in this spot. GM3 gives off big Paul Craig energy, and I know I probably mention Paul Craig every video, but he's the man. Just like Craig, he's so tricky on the ground, but he's also very patient. Like, you see a lot of situations where fighters grab a submission, squeezing for dear life for a minute and a half, and they don't get it. And the reason why that happens is because the submission is less than perfect. I don't doubt that anybody on the UFC roster has a hell of a squeeze. They're all strong people, but the submission is less than perfect, and you're not going to submit a professional fighter with a weak submission unless you were on last week's card. But you don't really see much of that in Gerald Meerschaert's fight. You don't see him squeezing things for very long. When Meerschaert starts to squeeze, it's because the submission is in place and the fight's about to be over. And I kind of expect that to happen this week. I expect him to get Jotko up to the fence, shuck him down, take his back, and find a rear naked choke at some point in this fight. Or he takes his back, Jotko gives up the mount, which is what you're supposed to do, and then GM3 finds an arm triangle from full mount. Either way, the pick for me for this fight is Gerald Meerschaert by submission. He's probably going to be a pretty popular play on DraftKings as well, just low in salary, high finishing upside, and Krzysztof Jotko will not be able to hang with him when this fight hits the mat. So proceed with caution. He's probably pretty chalky. We've seen GM3 lose to guys that he should have beaten in the past or give less than his best effort, but I'm still confident that he gets it done this week. Next at 8,700, we have Grant Dawson. He's going to be fighting Jared Gordon this week, and right away, this looks like a fantastic price for Grant Dawson. We have a dominant wrestler here, a dominant grappler in Grant Dawson against a guy who gives up takedowns pretty easily in Jared Gordon. He has about a 50% takedown defense. We know that Grant Dawson has 3-round cardio, he can push a strong pace, and he probably wants to make up for his last performance against Ricky Glenn, where he was supposed to smash him and just didn't. I expect to see a much stronger performance here against Gordon. I do think he's live for a finish as well. We've seen him rain down crazy ground and pound in his past fights, so I predict a TKO finish to come at some point by way of that ground and pound. And when we're talking about DFS, from a fantasy perspective, Grant Dawson has historically been very good to us. If you take out his last fight, he scores on average 99 points, so you're looking at a situation where he's going to show up on the winning lineup at 8,700. You would expect him to be a little bit more expensive. It's almost like we're getting him at a discount this week. So I really like him to get it done. Give me the bigger, stronger, younger fighter this week. The pick for me is Grant Dawson inside the distance. Next at 8,600, we have Darren Elkins. He's going to be fighting Tristan Connelly this week. I love MMA, and I'm sure you do too. And to love MMA is to also love Darren Elkins, because how could you not? The dude fights hard. Very blue-collar approach to this game. He's been around for a very long time, all around great for the sport. Now, I could sit here like every other channel and say, the damage is taking a lot of damage. I'm not going to sit here and act like his doctor, okay? The man fights for his family. Let's leave it at that. Now, I actually had him winning his last fight against Cub Swanson. I expected him to go out there, push a pace on Cub, be able to get him down, and really fight that gritty Darren Elkins style of fight. But Cub Swanson was in his bag that night. Cub was in the Matrix, and he really couldn't miss. So unfortunately, we took that L, but I expect to bounce back here over Tristan Connelly. Now, what I like about Tristan Connelly is his cardio. We've seen him fight hard for all 3 rounds, but I don't think he'll be able to out-wrestle Darren Elkins in this spot, nor do I think he offers him much on the feet. And in Tristan Connelly's last fight against Pat Sabatini, he was dominated on the ground, which no shame in that. It happens to a lot of people when they come up against Pat Sabatini. But he was knocked down in that fight, which is concerning because while Pat Sabatini's a beast, he's not known as somebody who's putting people down with his strikes. So this week, I expect that grueling, gritty, classic Darren Elkins type of fight where he gets his hand raised after 3 hard rounds. Give me Darren Elkins this week by decision. And one more thing I'll mention about this fight, when you look through Darren Elkins' career, and these are mostly decision wins that he's got, but he's scoring pretty well in a lot of them. You see a 99 there, 110, 82, 111, 140, 124. I mean, he puts it on, guys, and he scores a decent amount of points. And at 8,600, he's not a bad play at all. I think he makes a lot of sense in your lineups. Next at 8,500, we have Gabe Green. He's fighting Yohan Lainesse this week, and I expect this fight to be finished one way or the other. Gabe Green is a dog, and he does a lot of things well in the octagon. I see him winning fights for years to come in the UFC, but I don't think that he wins this one. UFC newcomer Yohan Lainesse, he hits like a truck. Like, he hits harder than Lil Wayne's No Ceilings mixtape. Money has been pouring in on Lainesse this week, and it's for good reason. I mean, Gabe Green has been knocked out twice in his career. I think we see a third this week. He's going to be at a slight height and reach disadvantage against Lainesse as well. That also worries me. And I'm normally not as high on a guy who's making his UFC debut, but this dude Lainesse is a different animal with unusual power in his hands. So I like him this week over Gabe Green, who I do have a lot of respect for. We saw him beat Phil Rowe. We saw him bust Phil Rowe's ass, and Phil Rowe is really good. But I think this guy just hits with a little bit too much power. The pick for me is Yohan Lainesse by knockout. Next at 8,400, we have Andrei Arlovski. He's going to be fighting Jake Collier this week. This is easy work for Andrei Arlovski. This is the exact body type and fighting style matchup, or at this stage in Arlovski's career, he does his best work. Andrei Arlovski has mastered MMA footwork at this point, and he still has excellent hand speed, and he's already seen everything. Like, you're not going to surprise him with any kind of technique. The only thing that's really beating him nowadays is just severe punching power that we saw from Jairzinho Rosenstruck, that we saw from Tom Aspinall. No shame in those losses. And there's a saying, I'm sure you know the saying, it's beware of an old man in a profession where men usually die young. So there's a reason why Andrei Arlovski is 43 years old and he's 5-1 in his last 6 fights. And on top of that, he comes into his fights in good shape. He's in shape. He's 245 normally. On the other side, Jake Collier he's A-shape. He's definitely A-shape.
Because he's a circle. He's a circle. Okay, we get it.
But this to me just looks like a classic case of a guy who is a solid fighter, a talented fighter, and a good athlete, but he shouldn't be in this weight class. He just can't put down the Mountain Dew. And trust me, Jake, I know it's delicious, but there are easier fights down at light heavyweight, I can assure you of that. Now, what I like about Collier, despite his girth, is his output. He's throwing 130, 126, 124. He throws a ton of strikes, and that could really help him here against Andrei Arlovski, but Arlovski has this way about him where he is able to control the pace of the fight, even if it is largely a striking battle. A lot of times when guys are good at controlling the pace of the fight, it's because they're using a lot of the clinch, they're getting takedowns, or trying to slow their opponent down by keeping them on the ground. But Arlovski has this way of controlling the pace of the fights with movements, counters, feints. It's pretty impressive. And if we look back, Jake Collier has never won or lost 2 UFC fights in a row. And he's most recently coming off a win, so we should expect a loss here if the MMA gods aren't laughing at us this week. So the pick for me for this fight is Andrei Arlovski by decision. Next at 8,300, we have our main event favorite, a slight favorite here against Marlon Vera. We have Rob Font, and this is a great fight for the UFC to make. This fight, had it been scheduled for 3 rounds, would be doing a disservice to the fans. So it's good work by the UFC because these guys in a main event slot, like, these guys need 5 rounds to work. This is probably going to be one of those barn burner fights that we talk about for years. Like, oh, remember that Doo Ho Choi Cub Swanson fight? Like, this is probably going to be that caliber of scrap. And this is also a great opportunity to stack in a cash game. Like, you're not going to have one fighter just finish the other in the first round. I highly doubt that. We got a couple of granite chins on these boys here. So you're looking at a situation like even Rob Font in his loss against Jose Aldo scored 77 points. That's better than a lot of people score in a 3-round decision, like here against Ricky Simone. Rob Font, he has great hands, very good chin. He can wrestle, and he never gives up. He's going to fight until they say stop. And the same could be said for Marlon Chito Vera on the other side. Now, when you look at Font's 3 most recent losses, he has a loss in the 5-rounder against Jose Aldo, where he threw almost 200 strikes, but Aldo did land the more meaningful strikes. He fought much better in the pocket, and he did rack up a lot of control time, which led to the win. Before that, he was out-grappled a few years ago by Rafael Assunção, and before that, he was submitted in the first round by Pedro Munoz. I believe that was a guillotine choke, just something he got caught with. If we look at Marlon Vera's last 3 losses, the most recently is also to Jose Aldo, where he was kicking Aldo's ass on the feet, and then Aldo backpacked him for the last 2 rounds. I'm sure you Aljamain Sterling fans loved that performance. He also fought against Song Yadong, which he says it's a unanimous decision win for Song Yadong, but that was highway robbery if you watch that fight. And then years ago, he loses a decision to Douglas Silva de Andrade. So on paper, I mean, this fight is razor thin close. Physically, they match up very well. My mind says Rob Font wins with tighter striking and better footwork, but my heart says that Cheeto wins because he's such a dog, and if this fight turns into a brawl where they spend a lot of time in the pocket, I think that he beats Rob Font. I also think that Marlon Vera has more ways to win this fight when you consider the submission possibility. And I'll make this easy for you. This is something you already know, but either way, you're going to need the winner of this fight in your lineup. If you're playing cash, obviously stack this up. This will give you a nice safe floor. And again, it's a no-brainer to put one of these guys in your contest. It's actually difficult for me to give you a hard lean now. I'm going to save the hard lean on this fight for the final picks video later in the week, so make sure you tune in Friday morning. But during the week, make sure you're building some lineups with Rob Font, make sure you're building some lineups with Marlon Vera, tinker with those two and see what you're able to do. And if you'd like, feel free to send me your lineups on Twitter. I had a couple people send me lineups last week, like with Dwight Grant in there. I said, get Dwight Grant out of there, and you saw what he did. So I'd be more than happy to give you lineup critique on Twitter. It is at Kunith MMA. And if you haven't already, drop a like on this video, comment something in the comment sections. It could be anything. You know how the algorithm works. They like the comments, so keep them coming. Next at 8,200, we have Daniel Da Silva or Daniel Lacerda, depending on where you look. He is fighting Francisco Figueiredo this week. He made his UFC debut late last year against Jeff Molina, where he did not take the punches that were coming back his way very well. Jeff Molina was able to put hands and feet on him early and then get him out of there in the second round. Figueiredo, on the other side, he's talented. He trains with the best flyweight in the world. He's slightly more experienced and he is the slightly cheaper option of the two. I actually think that Francisco Figueiredo finishes Da Silva in this spot. Just like his fight with Jeff Molina, I think for Da Silva, this is just a huge step up in competition for him. And I don't think it's a test that he's going to be able to pass. I worry that Da Silva isn't UFC caliber yet, and he got in on the basis that he was smoking guys on the regional scene, which is impressive, but it means nothing in the UFC, truly. I expect Figueiredo to catch him with something, follow him to the ground, and find the choke at some point. We also have a situation where the cheaper fighter in this fight is starting to become the betting favorite, which is something that I always like to attack. So the pick for me for this fight is going to be Francisco Figueiredo inside the distance. Now I'll quickly run through these underdog plays for you. We have Marlon Vera at 7,900. He's going to be very popular just being in the main event, being a popular fighter as it is, and also having a clear path to victory here, just staying in Rob Font's face and really letting his hands go. I do worry about him dropping the first 2 rounds and then them having a competitive 3, 4, and 5 that could go either way, because he does tend to start a little bit slowly. But he's also a guy who finds a way to win, like Jessica Andrade, who I don't think I gave her enough credit for just finding ways to win, because last week, I mean, she was losing on the feet. I think she would have went on to lose that fight. Amanda Lemos looked too long, too fast. She looked like she was punching and kicking too hard for Andrade to be able to hang with her, and then she gets the standing arm triangle. But, I mean, you won the fight. Marlon Vera in his last fight, Frankie Edgar, in my opinion, was winning the fight, or at least the 2 rounds were close, and then he pulls out that head kick, that front kick like Anderson Silva in the third. Golly. And we've seen him do things like that in the past where he just finds submission wins, he finds ways to win. He's a finisher through and through, and you can't really say the same thing for Rob Font, so I prefer this side of the matchup. Let's go, Cheeto! Jake Collier, I mean, there's a chance here. If he's able to throw 123 strikes against Andrei Arlovski, he should knock him out. But at the same time, Andrei Arlovski is just, I don't know. I try to fade him all the time and it just doesn't work. But if Jake Collier loses this fight, I would like to see him fight Parker Porter next. A battle of the bellies would be pretty cool. I think that this guy can quickly become a star in the UFC, especially because of this right here. Canadians love their MMA. And again, I do respect Gabe Green, and I think that he's going to win a lot of fights in the UFC in the future as well, but that guy just hits way too hard. Tristan Connelly, I think that his win against Michel Pereira was kind of flash in the pan stuff. I think that he loses this fight this week against Darren Elkins. I think that Darren Elkins has the cleaner striking. I think that he's more of a threat on the feet. And Darren Elkins is also a better wrestler. So give me the damage this week. I think Jared Gordon gets smashed. I think that GM3 is able to submit Krzysztof Jotko. If this fight stays on the feet, Krzysztof Jotko is going to work him to a decision. But if this fight hits the ground, I think that he's going to be able to find his back. Even if he's the one on his back first, I think that he's going to be the one to finish this fight from a dominant position on top. Shayna Young, I mean, I really don't want to play Shayna Young, but I don't want to play Gina Mazany at 8,900 more than I don't want to play Shayna Young at 7,300. So hopefully the Shanimal pulls it out here. Money Mike, I think that he is going to win. I think that he probably finds a knockout. Natan Levy was not that impressive to me. And also in his LFA fights, if you look at some of the decisions, like he was getting touched up a little bit. And I think Mike Breeden is going to be able to hit him harder than maybe he's ever been hit before. Carlos Candelario, I'm really not interested. I think that the Japanese kid is going to take his head off. And then I think that Joanderson Brito does fight a competitive fight in this spot, but is a step behind Andrei Fili, who's been there, done that, and is still getting better. If you have made it to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Make sure you like the video, comment something, anything. Tell me your dog's birthday. I'd love to know. You can go follow me on Twitter at Kunith MMA, where we talk a little bit of garbage. I actually posted some bets. I believe I posted 3 of them and 2 of them hit. So go get your money. And I will catch you later in the week. Thanks.